Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along today as well. Today, I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Dr. Irma McLaurin, who is the Education and Culture Editor at Insight News and anthropologist and archivist. She led the creation of the Irma McLaurin Archive at University of Massachusetts. She'll tell you about that. But through her, we're going to be meeting with Sayan Dey. Sayan Dey is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of Language and Literature at Alliance University in Bangalore. He's also a faculty fellow at the Harriet Tubman Institute at York University in Canada. His latest monographs are Green Academia Towards Eco-Friendly Education Systems, Routledge 2022, and Performing Memories, Weaving Archives, Creolized Cultures Across the Indian Ocean at Anthem Press 2023. His research interests include posthumanism, decolonial studies, environmental studies, critical race studies, culinary epistemologies, and critical diversity literacy. You can reach him at sayandey.com. Irma, let me ask you to add to that introduction and open this conversation.
Absolutely happy to join you. I met Sayan Dey when he was at the Diversity Institute at Wits University in Johannesburg. And he invited me to give the first post-COVID lecture about archives. And it turns out that he also does a show in which he talks about archiving. And in fact, I must say that the interview they did with me that talked about the archive inside of you was actually the subject of the talk that I gave when I received the honorary degree from my alma mater, Grinnell College. But Sayan Dey is, he's in literature, but he's part anthropologist, he's historian, he is an African diaspora scholar, and he is prolific. And I was pleased that he asked me to do some jacket notes for his latest book, which is called Performing Memories. I think we have a copy of that that will show. Performing Memories and Weaving Archives, Creolized Cultures Across the Indian Ocean. And what I said about his work is that he welcomes us on a journey of diasporic meanderings as he travels through time, space, geographies, cultural encounters, and hidden histories to explore. Dey also explores how and why invisibilizations are a part of yesterday's colonial master narrative and today's post-colonial enterprise, both rooted in global anti-Blackness. And the reason I say that is that he is telling a story in this particular book about the presence of Africans in India. And that presence has been there since the 15th century, if not earlier. And we never think about India as having any connection to people of African descent. And so I think Dey's work is important because this is another hidden history. It also tells us how expansive the African diaspora was, and that the Atlantic slave trade was not the beginning of this dispersal of Blackness across the world. It begins much sooner than that. So I think what he has to say is critical.
Well, with that, Brother Sayan Dey, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for joining us. You're in Amsterdam, I think, right? Or in Belgium, maybe.
Yes, I'm currently in Belgium, and thank you so much for this warm welcome, both of you. It's amazing to be in this space.
Well, let's just jump right in and talk about the things we should be thinking about in understanding the expanse, the breadth of the African diaspora, and not only as we see over here in the Western world, but in India, which is the area that you've developed remarkable expertise around.
Yes, thank you so much for this in question. And I think this is a very crucial point to begin with. It is important for us to note that the African presence in India historically has always been very diverse and rich. And Professor McFarlane just rightly mentioned at the very beginning, that we have a 15th century history of Africans arriving, and specifically from different parts of Eastern Africa, different parts of Southern Africa, and slightly a bit from Central Africa, arriving with the Portuguese colonizers in the different southern parts of India. But also it's important to note that it was the second phase of their arrival in the country. The first phase of their arrival dates back to the time of Islamic invasion. That is precisely around 13th century, when we see that lot of Africans as slaves, as palace guards, as eunuchs, as army people arrived in India along with the Islamic invaders. And what is really interesting is, I mean, obviously, slavery was a factor in the first invasion, I mean, in the first episode of arrival as well. But also you see the gradual transformation that they undergo in the process. So to further elaborate, what do I mean by gradual transformation is that, okay, fine, they arrive as slaves, but many of those Africans who were brought as slaves, they prove themselves to be physically very superior with strong muscle powers. They prove themselves to be very honest and dedicated and committed. So many of the Muslim kings, they just thought of freeing themselves from slavery and recruiting them, let's say, as palace guards or army officers, army leaders. So you see that very interesting transition, and that amongst many reasons contributed towards the generation-wise settlement of Africans in India. But you don't see the same thing at the time of Portuguese colonization. I mean, it was just outrightly just slavery. And I mean, there's the kind of slavery that we see across the world that has happened with the Africans across the world. So I think I'll actually stop here to just give a very brief overviewing history of how did the Africans arrived in India and they settled in the country and still they exist.
Well, as you explained, also tell us how you became interested in the work, what motivated you to take up this field of study, and what's your connection to it? Is there a personal connection to you and your family, your lineage?
Yes, and I just want to add to that, because I loved the part where you talk about how you came as a child to know this history and how it's led you as an adult into this. So if you could talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. And I really love that part, Al McFarlane, for asking me what are your personal connections, because that was a question that has always intrigued me amongst many questions which served as the entry point for this project. So obviously, I mean, I have no personal African connections, whether you talk about from a racial point of view, cultural point of view, family point of view, or any other viewpoints. But two perspectives, I mean, prior to what also Dr. Irma just now highlighted about one of my personal experiences, but even prior to that, I would like to highlight one thing. I mean, one aspect of my research is how from my childhood days, I have always been very fascinated by the cultures and traditions and various forms of existential and knowledge patterns of diverse interracial communities. Like, for instance, prior to working about and with the Afro-Indian community in India, I've also worked with the Anglo-Indian community, then the Indo-Scot community, because usually, and this interest widely ties to this problem of the ways in which we try to understand cultures and traditions in very fixated compartments, rather than trying to see how different forms of cultures and races and perspectives interact with each other in a very fluid and porous manner. A lot of times these segments, these separate compartments do not really work. And that was the primary reason which again got me interested in the cultures and traditions of this community as well. And then now getting back to that point which was highlighted by Prof. Irma, is where as a child I remember there are a couple of districts in the state from where I come from in India. It's called West Bengal. And though I was born and brought up in the city of Calcutta, but my aunts used to stay in a different district. And in that district has a very short, like 6 years, but a very interesting history of an African kingdom. And again, initially they were slaves who later on became army leaders, and then they killed the kings, and then they established their own kingdom there. And the fascinating part is I remember as a child when I would visit the place, my uncle, my aunt, my grandparents were still then there, and they would take me around and they would tell me stories. And one thing that always fascinated me as a child is what are Africans doing in my state. Like, I obviously as a child couldn't find any kind of relationality, but I was always very fascinated, like, what African histories and African cultures, African architectures. And my aunt would point out that, you see, this particular design, this is not a very Indian design. Obviously, I mean, at that point of time, I didn't understand the nitty-gritties of that. But that sort of fascination was instilled within me to sort of think beyond these very fixated categories of perceiving our societies and cultures around us. And I think today, when I sit here, and reflect back of this experience, I think that also did have a very, very strong impact in the current work that I did for this book and I'm doing with respect to, with this diaspora, interracial, intercultural communities in India.
That is to me so fascinating. One, not only that it dates back so early in India's history and in what we think about, we always think things began with the Atlantic slave trade, right? And that becomes the marker. But clearly there is evidence of Africans, one traveling about, sometimes as slaves, sometimes I know that, when we look at some of the earlier histories, there were African kings who sent their children to be educated in Portugal so they could learn the language. And then before that. But what strikes me in particular is your willingness to, one is that your grandparents and your relatives recognize that this was unique and that they told that story, but it's not told in the Indian history books, I'm sure. It's certainly not told in the colonial history books. So how do you get these stories out, and what are some of the examples of this Africanism in India that you could identify for us?
I mean, I think, Prof, you just almost responded to the question that you asked, because, I mean, you're so right that there is such a strong reluctance, a strong ignorance about acknowledging this part of the history, which has been very significant and is still very significant. I mean, a lot of the musical cultures, musical traditions, a lot of beadworks in India, a lot of patchwork cultures in India that we see in terms of weaving, has vastly been influenced by the presence of this African community in India. But sadly, no one talks about it. Even a lot of people, they just don't know about this community. I can tell you, there have been back in the 60s and 70s, obviously, when I was doing my archival work, when I was trying to look for literatures to sort of find out what are the existing works that sort of reflect on this community, who are in fact, just to inform all, that they're known as the Siddis, Siddis. They're often referred to as the Habshis as well, Habshis. I mean, Habshi usually sort of connects more to their Africanness, because prior to naming it as Ethiopia, the land was known as Habsh, Habsh, and that is from where they derived their ancestral roots, Habshi. I mean, not just from Ethiopia, but also other parts of Eastern Africa as well. But many of them trace their presence from Ethiopia.
And I
So,
think
if you want to recall,
we have an image, don't we, of one of your images of people playing drums. If we can show that
yes,
while you
yes,
talk
yes,
about
yes,
it.
yes, absolutely, and this actually, I mean, this image very much ties down to this question, because a lot of these archives, like for example, I have my own archives called the Roots and Roots, which is ROOTS and ROUTES, Roots and Roots. It's a YouTube archive which I use as a space to document these works, to sort of highlight and preserve these moments in terms of videos, in terms of music, in terms of the dances. But the reluctance is both ways. One is that, obviously, which sort of opens up the question to what extent racism is very much prominent and is very subtly played out within the Indian knowledge system. It has always been there. I mean, just to let everybody know that racism really didn't come in India with the European colonizers. I mean, even prior to the European colonizers, racism was there, which was color-based, which was caste-based, class-based, gender-based, and geography-based, and you can take many other examples. It only got sort of increased with the European colonizers and is still very much there. And this whole ignorance of this deliberate ignorance of the histories and cultures of a particular community and about the contributions that they still make towards the Indian society is a very racialized approach of understanding Indian history, which is, in the present right-wing regime, we can see how much it is undergoing erosion. I mean, sort of erosions and erasures of ideas and perspectives. That is one thing. And because of these erasures, many of us are not just aware like African communities exist in India. I mean, until unless you tell the people, until unless you start documenting these kind of works in terms of writings, in terms of videos and audios and photographs, that is when people, start getting fascinated. Like, well, I mean, is it so? How do they exist? From where do they come from? So this is, there are obviously many other reasons, but these two serve as very prominent reasons that why we have systemically and very strategically have not acknowledged the presence and the cultural values of these communities to date.
How do the systems of caste and color and identity overlap? Is there a question, of the Africans in India? How do they fit into the traditional structural caste and colorism modalities?
I mean, it's actually very complex. It's very complex, and this is, I think, a very provocative question, because what happens is, so just to explain the context why it is very complex. So according to the Indian Constitution, once India got judicial independence, as I always put in, as the government of India, in the name of sort of empowering, as they use the word, the various so-called socially, culturally, and economically marginalized communities, they introduced these categories. It called scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward castes, and based on a system, and which is again very problematic, very questionable, where they categorize one community as more oppressive than the other, and then they generate these categories. And usually the scheduled tribes category is a particular category where the indigenous communities are a sort of put into that particular framework. And on a similar note, the Afro-Indian community in India are categorized within that particular category. But from the lens of the caste system, they are basically perceived as outcasts. And till date, they experience extreme levels of harassment, extreme levels of ignorance, where, like, a lot of narratives exist where people would go to the banks. For instance, let's say they want to open up their bank account, and they have all the necessary documentations that one requires. But then people, knowing who they are, still they will be harassed by saying that, well, it's a fake document, you don't look like an Indian, you look like an African, you are bringing in a fake document. And you get a letter from the police. Go to the police station, get a sanctioned letter that you are genuine, and then come. And then what happens when you go into the police station? It's like a chain. You are harassed, you're asked to pay a bribe, or if you are a woman, you may be subjected to sexual harassments, and at the cost of that, you get the facilities. So this is just one of the many such traumatic experiences that they undergo on a very regular basis.
Wow. I mean, I'm hearing so many elements of what we hear again, like with indigenous people. You don't look Indian, right? Or Native American. And so now they're saying you don't look Indian in a particular kind of way. And yet, of course, these communities have not been in isolation, right? They've mixed up with other groups that were indigenous to India itself. And so I think Al's question about, okay, so they're outcasts, but what happens when they start to intermarry? Or do the people who marry them then become part of that particular group? And you talked about the city as one particular group in Gujarat, I think. And also, so is there evidence also in Bengal too, where you still have these groups?
This is actually a very interesting perspective to look at, because if you look at the tendencies of these communities, usually what they do is, it is by their own choice. Actually, they wish to marry within their communities, because the number one reason is they don't want to lose their Afro-Indian identity, their Siddhi identity. And the one interesting perspective is that this community, the cities are mostly Muslims. Just to first tell, the cities are mostly Muslims, especially in Gujarat. But you find the cities in south of India are Christians, because they mostly came with the Portuguese invaders, the colonizers. So they do marry other Muslim people from other communities, but they try to ensure that even the person that they are getting married to, they at least have some sort of respectability and understanding about the Siddhi cultures and traditions. That is one thing they try their best to ensure. Obviously, I mean, every time that is not a possibility, but they try their best to make sure, so that at the end of the day, they don't lose their Afro-Indian cultural roots. They don't lose their ancestral roots that they still struggle very hard to preserve in terms of their spiritual worships, in terms of music and dance.
Wow.
We're
So,
out of time.
Al,
Go
yes,
ahead.
I was going to say that this has been so fascinating because I mean, we actually have to get Sayan to write something, because I think this is one of those stories that needs to be translated into the 7 languages. Al does an Afro-Descendente column that is translated into English, Spanish, Portuguese, Somali, Swahili, French, and what
English.
else? And English. Oh, yeah, yeah. And so I think writing something too would be really important to continue the conversation.
Well, we're out of time right now, but this is absolutely fascinating. Sayan Dey, I'm pleased to meet you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your work with us. Let this be the beginning
Yes.
and hopefully a long-term relationship. Irma, I know you've got to catch a
Yeah,
train.
can we show a copy of the book, the cover of the
Sure,
book?
sure.
Okay, there we go. So
Okay.
I think this is so important. And so I hope to see you again in this space. All right. And continue this discussion about another African diaspora that is not where we thought it would be.
There we go.
Thank
I
you.
know.
And thank you so much, both of you, for having me here and for generating this really fascinating conversation. And I'm so much looking forward to more conversations and continue this discussion in the present and in the future. Thank you so much once again for having me in this space.
Awesome. We'll be back in a minute. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Gotta go. So I'll see you guys. Okay. And Sayan, I'll be in touch. Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We're extending our healing circle today, Friday. This is Veterans Day, and it's so wonderful as a veteran to be in the company of other veterans talking about our experiences serving our country in the military. I'm a Navy veteran. My two brother warriors here are Douglas Garrett, a major, retired major, 5 or 28-year career, uh, 24-year career in the Army, and brother Austin Garrett with the Air Force. And I think I'm not sure how many years you served, Brother Garrett.
Close to 7.
7 years, okay.
7 active and 2 reserves.
Okay. And so that's great. I had 2 years active duty and 4 years in reserve. So it's good to have this conversation. I was telling you both that while I was 20 years old, 18, I was a critic. I became a critic of American foreign policy, and that was in reaction to the winding down of the Vietnam War. I was a student at Morehouse College in 1965, and the war was raging, and I had a change of heart from the patriotic impulse that guided me to join when I was a student in high school to a consciousness that I found myself acquiring as a student at Morehouse, working with and listening to, watching the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee activists who would come through town and spend weekends on campus teaching, doing teach-ins, having discussions, right, about the world. And these were just fascinating analyses that went against the standard apple pie Americana. They made us look at that differently and think differently because we're reading Frederick Douglass, we're reading history differently. Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, we're reading and having discussions all the time. Well, so here we are today. I say that I, in retrospect, have been completely comfortable recommending to people in my family and young people, Black people, that we use the military opportunity as one of the pathways for personal and community development, growth, and for actually, it makes sense that we express our civic obligation, that if we want to be owners of the enterprise, we have to embrace all of the elements that reflect ownership, sovereignty, and that includes the work of managing and defending and protecting. And I heard that so loudly and so clearly from Brother Austin, powerfully stating your commitment and your reminder that if you really are, if something's important to you, you're willing to die for it. Mm-hmm. Well, let me stop there. And Dr. B, let me pass the talking stick to you, and you can invite Brother Douglas and Brother Austin to continue the conversation with me.
What I'd like to do, thank you, Brother Al, for the talking stick. And what I'd like to also add in to this conversation is how important the veterans are to their families, and what that has meant, the work that you've gone, the work you did, the way you came out, how you had to recover, and the values you still hold in community and in homes with your family. And all of y'all have grandchildren, and so I really would like to hear about your legacy, that legacy piece that was mentioned in the first part of our show today. So with that, I guess I can pass the talk to Brother Douglas, and then hopefully you'll pass it to Brother Austin, and we'll just keep this veteran talking going on. We're up in here today. So
All right.
here's this, Brother Douglas.
All right. Thank Dr. B. I want to sort of go back and reflect upon why I went into the military. The first thing is we talk about racism. Ravada and I went to this school called Florida High School. And it was when I went there, during the time of integration.
Yeah.
And so we talk about attitudes. I remember I got married at a very early age. I got married at 18 years old. And my wife at the time was 15. So y'all know why I got married. But that was our choice. That was the moral compass at that time. You didn't impregnate somebody and not marry them, and that's just the way that it went. But I remember as I got a scholarship to go to college, at Cisco Junior College, which was probably 1% Black and 99% Texans. I remember I didn't get through my first semester. And I came home, I tried to get a job, and nobody would hire me. I couldn't even get hired at a service station. So my daddy was prophetic, and my daddy told me once in my early days, he said, son, he said, you're gonna have 3 problems in life. He could say cars, women, and running from God. And he also said that, Mr. Graham is gonna have you on a tractor. And I never forget, when I was 18 years old, he had me on the tractor. I was plowing a field, and he got stuck, and the front of the tractor was up in the air, and I jumped off, called my daddy, and my dad says, well, have you thought about the military? Now, my military, you talk about my brother. I remember my brother Austin had this 68 Camaro.
69.
69. It was gold and black. And I said, if nothing else, I'm going to give me a Camaro so I wouldn't join the army. You talk about God directing your path. I had my grandmother tell me once, and I don't know if Bravada and Austin, you've ever heard this, but my grandmother Odell told me that I would never amount to anyone, that I would go to jail before I graduated from high school. I had an older stepbrother that told me that if I was on fire, he wouldn't piss on me. Trauma, Bravada, you talk about trauma. So trauma caused me to take the path that God has set me on. He said, well, I'm going to put you in the military. I was going to be in the Army band. And so I was good. I was really good at what I did. I remember going to an audition at Fort Hood, Texas. And I passed the audition, but this one officer that was white said, you know what? We're not going to let you in because you're Black. He said, and there were no Blacks in the Army band at Fort Hood at that time. So he called my recruiter and said, give that man anything he wants. So like you, Austin, I scored lowest on mechanics, but I scored very high in administration. So I became a clerk. So I did my 3 years. I made sergeant in 8 months.
Wow.
Doing Vietnam, because I was a hard charger. But I was also a comedy clerk, so I typed up my own promotions. But anyway, I just put it in front of the commander. He signed it. So, but as I stood there, I just knew that my journey wasn't going to end there. And so I think God placed that major at the right time. To say, maybe you don't need to re-enlist. Maybe you need to go to college, because that's the only difference between you and I. And so Bravada will tell you, I graduated from Texas Tech in 2 years with a bachelor's degree. GPA was reflective of that. Don't get me wrong. A 2.00000. But it got me back in the military. Now they put me in field artillery because there weren't enough African Americans in combat arms. But I remember going to field artillery school, and then first thing they gave me was a calculus and a protractor. I couldn't even pass modern math. You know, but I learned and I practiced, and it was a white sergeant that helped me get through it. But I remember my mama calling me one night, said, "I'm praying for you," because when I started, there were 33 African Americans in my class. The only one that graduated was me.
Wow.
And I remember my mom prayed and prayed and prayed, and I felt that prayer. So the very next day, I got a call from the Department of the Army saying, "We're going to branch transfer you. Where do you want to go? Here's your choices of branch: finance, intelligence, and human resources." So since I was human resources in the as an enlisted person, I went human resources in the Army, and I excelled. Now, here's where it gets a little dicey. You talk about legacy. One reason that my biggest problem was not really external. My biggest problem was internal. My biggest problem was I didn't select the right mate. And my mom told me once that, you guys are oil and vinegar, and so she loved her, but so it made it very difficult for me to fight on all fronts. I would have to fight being not Black enough. I would have to fight not being white enough. I would have to fight a dysfunctional house.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for 20 years.
Mm.
But God got me through it. But Body, you said we develop from our strengths. Trials and tribulations will pay if you look at it in the right view. And so when it talks about legacy, I had this conversation with my son where he told me just a few months ago that he was very displeased with how he was raised as a child. And I said, you know what? I said, I agree with you 100%. I said, because what you feel is your truth. I said, but that's only 50% of the story.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so I'm going to let you think about what you said. And when you're ready to have a real, true conversation, I said, then I'm ready to have it with you. I said, but I'm still your father.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so you look at me, at the total, look at all I gave you, look at what I prepared you for. And you tell me if the good doesn't outweigh the bad.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the conversation. So I say that to say this. When I went and I was diagnosed with PTSD, it surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, how was I able to function? She said, because you're a highly functional person.
Mm-hmm.
So to say what you see, the people on the outside don't know what you feel on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so the military really, it should have broken me, but it didn't. Because nothing I had to do, it was God. I remember, Al, I was up for lieutenant colonel, and I had a major car wreck that should have killed me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember as I was laying there, I remember seeing, it was dark. I remember seeing a very dim, pin-sized white light.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying, God, don't take me now, because I don't know who's going to take care of my kids.
Right.
So that was when I knew this is supernatural, right? And so I get out soon thereafter, and I was in pretty good shape in the sense of there. But then once I got out of the military, I got out of that box. Then I began to realize how damaged I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that prompted me to go get another degree. I got 2 bachelors, one in sociology, I have one in business management, and then I have a master's in family studies. That prompted me to take my family studies. So I want to figure out how family structure, family dynamics, and certain stages of development affected who I was today. And so it pointed me toward fathers. God said, train them in the way that you would have them go, and they would never depart. And the father is the spiritual leader of the house. So I was none of that. I wasn't a spiritual leader. I was too busy trying to fight the demons. So I didn't become a spiritual leader. So when my son said that he wasn't happy, he was right, because I didn't lead with God as my, and so I said, but I'm here now.
Mhm.
I'm here now. So I want this legacy to be a positive legacy. I said, whatever you feel, son, I said, know that I'll always love you and I will be here for you, whatever you need. And so I say that to summarize in the sense that God directs your path, and it's not going to always be easy. It is because of the difficulty that I can appreciate where I am now. I'm financially stable. I'm emotionally stable. I have a wonderful wife, and I can sit and look out of my window and saying, this God is good.
That's right.
And that's what it's all about. But the military really showed me who I was. I mean, to have gone through that, you cannot say that I did that on my own. It's more than luck. It's more than circumstance. It's divine intervention.
Thank you,
And so
Douglas.
if we would all focus on God's plan for us, then I think this would be a better world. It's about love. It's about personal respect. And I think when you look at these issues going on in society today, again, I truly believe this is only the tip of the iceberg. But whatever's going to happen, God got his hand on it.
Yep.
And it's going to come out for the good.
Yep.
And so that's where I'm going to hang my banner right now, is wait for God to do what God does. And I'm going to be all right with that. And I can accept my faults, but I also know that there's some goodness in me as well, because God is in all of us, right?
That's right.
Amen.
So
what
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said, so when you think about your legacy, I'm hearing you say a couple of things. One of them is taking bad things and making them good.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing I hear you say is that one of the legacies that you're passing on is that parents, fathers, they do their best with what they've got at that time.
Right.
And that there's still tomorrow. As long as you've got breath, you can keep doing it. I'm here now. And I love those three things, how they kind of hang together and define a lot of who you are and why you are, giving God the glory for even the difficult times that make you the man you are today. And I'm just wondering, do you think that's similar? I'm just going to shift it in a minute, Brother Douglas. Do you think that's similar for you, Brother Austin, in terms of what Douglas just said about the legacy issues?
Yes, I think there's a lot of similarities. Douglas asked me once he should he get out of the army. He was going through some struggles somewhere, and I do understand that, being a military man during the 60s and the 70s. And he said, you think I ought to get out? And I said, hell no. You got 17 years in. It's too late now. No, you finished it off, That's probably the one thing I would have done. I would have stayed in longer and got, a retirement. I had an opportunity before I got out to go into the Navy. My friends were going to officer candidate school, OCS, and they had a venue, a path for us to go into the Navy as officers. And but people hated the military, and my life was the trauma, my lack of confidence in myself, the lack of self-respect, those things, the guilt I had from my family, my wife and children. We were all still together, but those things played a big part in my decision. I was not living the Christian life I was brought up to live.
Right.
In fact, I was more or less rebelling against it. And when I got off on my own, Brother McFarlane, and Bangkok, Thailand, and places like that, and mom and daddy wasn't around, and I was married, boy, I was the biggest sinner on the planet. Yeah, I did a lot of things that I'm not happy with. But I don't let those things beat me up today.
That's right.
Young, we make mistakes, we grow, and so I'm learning how to forgive myself. So this program that you have about healing is powerful. I didn't realize that you and Dr. B would roll us into this kind of healing thing that I'm seeing happening to all of us today. One quick thing, I don't have a lot more. I have an 18-year-old son here. It's mostly belly. I got to feed him in a minute. But one of the things that I remember when I was in Vietnam in Da Nang, the DAP thing Douglas mentioned with all the black military guys. Oh my goodness, you go to lunch in the mess hall and you would spend 15 minutes dapping. Every time somebody would come in, you would do all this. It was powerful. I've never felt that kind of camaraderie before. I mean, those brothers were serious, man. If we had some, man, you're talking about power, it was there. And we pretty much did what we wanted to do. We got rocket attacks in Da Nang. They call it Rocket City, and we lived through that. And some of our brothers and sisters in white and black died over there. But that was one day that I had a white friend that was my neighbor in California. We'd gone through basic training, tech school, and got stationed in California together, San Bernardino. And we were there together, and we ended up in Da Nang at the same time from different places. And we were going to the movie one day, and some brothers came up and asked him for a cigarette. And so he said, sure, man. He gave him a cigarette. And then the other brother said, give me another one. And the other said, give me another. I said, damn, that's enough. That's it. Come on. He gave you all a cigarette. Go ahead and leave us alone. You know, like that white officer did for Douglas. That was my true friend. It wasn't had a color then. I was aware of my blackness for the first time in my life. But I was also aware of my humanity. And this guy that was next to me was my dear friend. He was my neighbor. He lived across the street from me. We'd gone through thick and thin together. I hope our country can get to that. I got to share this, and I gotta go. One of the things that you see hanging behind my desk, it's called America the Beautiful. I'm just gonna read a little of this, and I'm gonna stick on. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God sheds his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet who stern in passion stress, a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God, mend thine ever flaw, confirm thy soul and self-control, thy liberty and law. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country love, and mercy more than life. America, America, my God, thy gold refined, till all success be nobleness, and every grain defined. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. That's where we need to be as a nation. We need this brotherhood more than we've ever needed it since our inception. We need to learn how to love and work with one another. And as a consequence of this, I have many friends. I'm in Florida now. I'm a retired vocational therapist at a drug rehab center. I am a recovering alcoholic and addict. I'm proud of that because I put the word recovering in front of it. And many of my patients and clients are Jewish. The guy who founded Karen Renaissance is a Jew, Sid Goodman. You don't get more Jewish than Sid. And I learned a lot of love and compassion from this man. And when this thing happened in Israel last month, I reached out to some of my friends on Facebook and I said, I'm so sorry. I feel so hurt about what happened. And some of them responded to me, but I just hope no more innocent people on either side have to die.
Mhm.
Wow.
Mhm.
Man, on either side, they know what this thing is about. On either side. And look what's happening. Only God can stop this thing. These children, and he works through people, by the way. So that don't mean we sat on our butts. Yeah, we got to move. We got to get up. We got to move and vote and have these talks. It's a lot of work we need to do, but I sure appreciate it. Brother McFarlane, Dr. B, Douglas, appreciate it so much. I didn't know how badly I needed this. And thank you.
Well,
Thank
you know what, Brother Austin, Dr. B, Brother Douglas, I think that's a mic drop. So with that, with that, I want to thank you all again, brothers. Thank you for doing what you do, for having given what you gave and what you continue to give. Thank you for the work of creation that guides your every breath right now. Thank you for the generations of human beings that show up in your present moment. And thank you for the generations to come, ad infinitum, into the future, into eternity. And thank you for being part of and at the center of this eternal moment. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.